Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Hibbard with the BUILD Initiative. We're excited to host this webinar on behalf of the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, which is a partner of BUILD and the First 5 Years Fund. The collaborative was started in part by the eagerness of private funders to support this opportunity for increased federal investment. When it started in 2011, the collaborative was clear that it had several goals, which included supporting states as they sought to apply for, implement, and then document the outcomes related to the Early Learning Challenge. BUILD's role in the collaborative is to coordinate technical assistance and learning community activities. And this webinar is one of those learning community activities geared toward Round 3 applicants. And like many of the webinars that we've been holding, we're drawing on the lessons learned in the experience of the Round 1 and the Round 2 grantees. So thank you all as well, presenters, for sharing your knowledge. At the end of the webinar, I'll say a little bit more about the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, including announcing some future webinars and letting you know about other technical assistance that might be available to your state as you prepare your application. At the end, you'll see the web address for the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative. Many of the materials on that site were developed for Round 1. But are equally useful now. Others have been updated and put on specifically for Round 3, and then we've created new materials that we think will be helpful to you, drawing on the experiences of the earlier rounds, including things like a review of what the federal reviewers were looking for in each section, what they particularly wanted to see in Section B, for example. On the logistics front, everybody except the presenters is automatically muted as you join the call now. We're going to give you a number of opportunities during the webinar to be able to ask questions, and there are a number of different ways to do that. To ask a question verbally, you need to press *7. That will unmute your line, and then when you're done, you press *6 to mute yourself again. Alternatively, you can virtually raise your hand, and then the moderator will call on you when we're taking questions. And again, at that point when you're called on, you'd press *7 to unmute yourself. Or you can use the little chat box and write questions there, and those will be asked when they fit in nicely to any of the presenters. So that's all I'm going to say now. I'll turn it over to our very own Debbie Mathias, who will moderate this webinar. Debbie?
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Mathias. I'm the director of the Qris National Learning Network, and I know most of you on a first-name basis, so it's just so great to have this opportunity to talk to you today, with you today, about the Race to the Top ELC Round 3, Section B. I know that many of you have been studying, preparing, working already, and this additional set of information isn't meant to throw a wrench in your plans at this point. You probably have an idea of the direction that you're moving. Hopefully it will affirm what you're thinking and the road you're moving down already, or it might give you a slight tweak or a reminder about something you want to add in or do a little bit differently. I know some of you attended the face-to-face session or watched the live streaming video on Tuesday from the feds, where they provided some technical assistance and went over the application and what they're looking for. That information is certainly a big priority for you to know and understand and think about as you prepare your application. We all want this session to be most helpful for you. So we're really looking to you to add in your questions into the chat box, or to raise your hand when we have an opportunity, or something, point you have or a question you have is germane. And please, after the session is over, feel free to reach out to me or Susan or Jerry, and we can delve deeper into questions that are real specific to your state, and we'll handle those offline later on after the presentation today. So in terms of what we hope to accomplish today, we've kind of done the welcome already, and we thought we'd take a moment and reflect about what did we learn from the last competition. Sometimes the past can inform the future. We have some successful applicants and Race to the Top states with us today, and hearing what they were thinking, what they've done is going to be the highlight, I think, of the webinar today. So we're looking for a deep conversation with our 3 state representatives. And then finally we'll wrap up a little thinking about the performance measures and the final points. I think like I said, our presenters, I'm looking the most forward to the conversation with them. They have just wonderful insights and expertise to share. They can even, as winners and people now implementing, give us some lessons learned and what would they have done differently and how is it playing out and what would they be thinking about at this point. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. The first part I'd like to start with is a piece that Louise Stoney wrote for all of us, and a number of the resources referenced were sent to you today prior to the session, where they are posted on the ELC website. So you can look for them there. If you can't find them, just send me an email and I'll look them up for you. But I just want to briefly talk about this paper that Louise wrote, Unlocking the Potential of QRIS, Trends and Opportunities in Race to the Top. She did a review of the Race to the Top applications, and it really suggested that states, and I think we've felt this in particular over the last 3 years, are really moving from the QRIS as an intervention strategy to improve child care alone to a real robust systems building effort within states. And that shift was certainly driven home with the past and, again, this application and Race to the Top. And I think that we can see from the states that were successful and those that were not but still implemented elements of their plans that this deep systems building is really the hallmark of this effort and this initiative. I think that some of the things that we looked at in terms of systems for reform, the states reviewed set as a priority to raise the bar on program quality rather than aligning to the lowest common denominators. And I think we really see this in terms of looking at the North Star accreditation systems, thinking about how do we move from global quality to deep improvement in teaching and learning that will impact child outcomes. And we're seeing as we move into the child assessment arenas, states really strengthening as they evaluate their systems, as they clarify their where they're trying to go in their state in terms of quality and outcomes for children. We're seeing states acknowledge the need to develop stronger links in the QRIS to child outcomes. To this end, quite a few states noted in their application they intended to add or strengthen the child assessment components in their standards. And an increasing number of states were seeking to also improve the cultural and linguistic appropriateness of the assessments that they were using. Many states noted that they intended to use web-based or automated systems to streamline administration and increase access to training, as well as technical assistance tools and resources. And we found this highlight on technology as a place where people could invest Race to the Top money and not have quite as strong a sustainability issue around that. We know that there is need to keep going with the IT systems and all, but the big build is where the money can really be fruitfully used to align all the database systems within a state. We saw that many Race to the Top applicants raised concerns that children with high needs reside in communities with few high-quality early learning and development programs. To address this concern, states proposed innovative strategies for targeting dollars to high-need communities. We saw some states called them intensified communities or transformation zones. Other states didn't give what they were doing a name but planned to focus dollars using geographic information systems or their deep reach and risk studies, which illuminated where do we have the least penetration within a state and we need to dig deeper in terms of figuring out how to support and encourage programs in those locales. I think we're seeing people really focus their attention and think about how can they improve in those communities. In terms of financial incentives, although we know finance is a key component of system reform, only a handful of states included innovative financing strategies. And I would say over the last 2 years we're seeing some ideas come forward, but still the strongest players in this arena are the tiered reimbursement, grants and awards, supports to the workforce for higher qualifications and retention, and we are seeing some things come along. In terms of tax reform and other ideas that we can talk more about if you're interested in that. I think that I want to just for a minute mention some of the challenges that Louise drew our attention to in this paper. And I think that I want to mention a few as in a way they're still present in our work moving forward. Raising the bar on quality for the system is difficult when access to financial resources is so uneven, and I know this has really gotten to many of us in our sustainability work and how do we keep moving forward after the race to the top. There's a direct relationship between the financial resources available to a program and its capacity to meet high quality standards. Not surprisingly, most states indicated that they expected early learning programs with access to stable funding to be able to operate at the higher standards, like Head Start, state pre-K, and many states developed alternate pathways about how those programs might participate, not taking the burden for meeting standards or performing at a high level, but rather not duplicative, and they were working to streamline the participation. I think one of the things that's really helped us more in the financial end right now is really the cost modeling information that's been posted on the federal website that Ann Mitchell developed for all of us to use so that we could begin to wrestle more deeply with what does it actually cost to improve quality. And each level of our QRIS, how do we analyze what types of financial incentives need to go in. So I think that cost modeling tool has been very important, and over the last 2 years I would put forward that we have a deeper understanding of what it takes to move to higher quality levels. I think one of the continuing challenges, but states have met this one, is how do we engage schools in QRIS in a meaningful way. The culture and practice divides between the care and education communities are deep-seated in many states. About half of the states proposed phasing in QRIS in some or all school-based LEDs, especially those receiving pre-K funding from the state. States need to think very strategically about how to craft a TQRIS system and incentive that can engage school-based programs and be a valuable asset to them in their work. The challenge, I feel, is to identify a few meaningful measures that can apply to all early learning and development sectors. Limiting on-site classroom assessments. Some of the strategies states were using to keep monitoring costs in check were limiting on-site classroom assessments to higher quality, maximizing automation, again that theme comes back, and coordinating monitoring with other monitoring efforts so that programs funded by multiple entities are monitored only once. So in short, technical assistance and coaching, strategic thinking regarding the scope and approach to target technical assistance is essential. This can be a very costly service, and states need to give a lot of thought to how they're deploying the technical assistance within their states. We posted a learning table about technical assistance that can really give some good advice about how to align the vast array of technical assistance that can be available within a state. And there's a lot of great information in that learning table regarding technical assistance and the strides we're making in understanding that source of supports for programs. Finally, just a quick word about evaluation. And as it says on the slide, that the evaluation must go deeper, and guidance from the experts in evaluation research, as well as a coordinated multi-state approach, will benefit us all as a whole. And we are seeing more and more collaborations between states on validation and evaluation. Sometimes it's not a full-blown validation study, but an analysis of a small component like the success of the technical assistance or some other small components. And these evaluation studies we're trying to put out on our bi-monthly news and notices as they come up, because we really feel that what states are doing in this arena can really inform all of us to improve and have more research-aligned systems development. Now I'd like to move into a piece that was done for BUILD, where we took the, we had asked someone to analyze the top 6 scoring states in each subsection of the application and tell us a little bit about what conclusions she drew from reading those 6 applications in that particular segment. And so these are on the slides and you can come back to those. We've given you the full report posted on the resource section for your information and reference. It has more words about what exactly was found. And on each of these sections I'm just going to highlight a few. Again, this is reflecting back on what made a successful application in the first round. So in section B1, I just call your attention to addressing all components of the standards was important. And I'd like to call your attention to the health promotion strategies. Sometimes states had a lighter touch on the health promotion strategies because that was well covered in their licensing regulations upon which the QRIS is built. If that is the case in your state, you'll want to call to the reviewer's attention how deeply health and promotion strategies are covered in your licensing, and then how you're adding on to that in your QRISs. Even things like screening that's required in your QRIS, or safety checklists, other things like that that you might have included, but sometimes it's not a robust health package in the QRIS because that strategy is strongly embedded in the licensing within the state. I found it interesting that the reviewer pointed to structural and process quality assessment of the standards. So those would be tools like the structural for the QRIS and how do the standards get to a foundation of being able to go deeper in terms of teacher and child interactions and assessment. Finally, licensing incorporated into the QRIS as the first tier. Many states have gone in this direction. But although I can't say that 100% of the first 14 did, I do believe there were 5 or 6 in the first 14 that are still voluntary in their approach to this. Some states had a long time span between when it was voluntary and when it became part of base licensing. And there is a lot of work, regulatory work to do here, and those challenges differ within states. But it is a consideration about the participation. Finally, we found that the raters were drifting to more as opposed to fewer tiers. And I found this one interesting also because validating the differential between more tiers is more challenging than validating a differential between fewer tiers. And so they like more tiers because it gives an incremental stepping stone approach to the work. Someone can get us somewhere, move somewhere, and there's that real stepping stone feeling to it. But it does make it tougher on the validation side to differentiate. So let's move on now to section 2 of this, of the analysis. This is promoting participation in the state's quality and rating improvement system. And for those of you that attended our QRIS National Learning Network meeting, there was a session directly related to participation. States are digging really deep in terms of how to work with hard-to-reach, hard-to-serve providers, rural providers, family child care providers. What kinds of supports can you entice and use with school-based providers? We are really deepening our background of knowledge, and we have the webinars and resources from all of those sessions posted under our QRIS National Meeting. So if you're looking for a specific topic like this, you can move into that section. Again, having TQRIS built into licensing seemed to be something that resonated in terms of participation, and certainly gave those states that went with that approach 100% of regulated programs are in. And that's a pretty stunning number to look at right away. You have 100%. A negative that the reviewer found was that less detailed plans on how you would recruit families and ensure more high-needs children. People weren't going as deep as, and I think it's one of those things where we would all might assume that people would know. Of course we would do that through our subsidy system or our outreach, networking with other statewide like WIC programs and homeless shelters and so forth. But I think calling more attention or drawing a direct line was sometimes in order here. I think finally, making sure that you think through and analyze your approach to enrollment in the QRIS and to the progression through the tiers. And we'll come back to that point when we talk after we hear our states and talk about reflecting on the performance measures. All right. Make sure to type questions as we go along, or write on a piece of paper. Keep track of things that we're saying or reviewing that you want to come back to. We do want to make this very relevant so that you're getting what you're wanting out of it. And I assume we'll have a lot more of that when we get to our state conversation. In terms of Section B3, rating and monitoring the early learning programs, you can see the states that were reviewed here, and the states were using, as we said before, measures to look at both the structural quality, like the environmental tools, and the process quality. And so we're seeing people really get deeper in their thinking about these strategies and how they relate to each other. The next thing we would say is how are you addressed? It's important to call out how you're addressing inter-rater reliability, not only in the valid and reliable tools that you might be using, like ERS or CLASS, but how are you actually dealing with inter-rater reliability or consistency of rating when you apply the STAR level based on the sources of evidence. Reviewers like more opportunities for monitoring versus fewer, and here's that old push and pull between how much financing do we exert on monitoring versus where do we get a realistic and accurate level and staying power. Are you a star 3 for a day, or are you living at a star 3? And what's the interval for us to understand? So I would say that even if you were rating less frequently, some type of a process to do interim tracking of whether your approach was holding up in a research-based way would be important to describe or think about. So if your ratings every 3 years, do you do a subset every 1 or 2 years to make sure that that assumption about a 3-year hold was working? Next, this reviewer pulled out about the family engagement part, and I think that this is, I felt like it was a little out of context in rating and monitoring the engagement of families around understanding the rating and the monitoring and what the system is about. But it is in this section, and so you're going to want to make sure that you deal robustly with how are you working, especially with high-need families, and engaging them in understanding what high quality is within your state and having a detailed communication strategy. In the paper where the reviewer pulls this out, she gives specific state examples so that if you would like to go look at those examples more deeply, you're welcome to do that. The other thing is on our main web page for the QRIS National Learning Network, there is a state contact list along with our state map about how states are engaged in QRIS. I call your attention to the links to each state's quality initiative page. So if you want to look deeper at what a state was doing or how they worked in a certain area, you can go to their page. As I said at the beginning of this section, I know that many of you are deep into already, have a focus and a direction with your plan, but if you need some tips or some ideas, these can be resources for you to look at and move forward with. B4, promoting access to the QRIS. In review of the top 6 successful applicants in this subsection, states have been creative in their subsidy incentives to promote continuous improvement. We've seen a lot of action in the tiered reimbursement world in terms of incentives and using the cost modeling to get to a good place where the cost modeling is really relevant incentive for serving children at risk. Some states are broadening their definition of children with high needs to expand their access and account for more children as they focus in on their quality improvement efforts. Finally, section B5. We didn't do an analysis of this section, but there is so much good, more current information out there about validating the QRIS. We'd like to call your attention to these 3 deep resources that can really give you guidance and helpful suggestions and deep thinking about how to put together your validation plan for your QRIS. Wrapping up briefly with general trends that our reviewer noted about the most successful applications. The narrative and data charts need to match. The data must support the same story the narrative is describing. Think carefully about your operational details. The big ideas have to have the high quality, deep plan attached to them and show that thoughtful planning. You want to have your measurable, data-driven plans to target all children with specific enhancements for the high-need populations. Again, how are you using data and risk and reach and other tools, demographic information at your disposal to focus in on that group of children? And I'd like to just spend one moment. There were innovative approaches in the first Race to the Top, and one I'd just like to call your attention to is the shared services approach. Shared services is an early care and education business model that enables particularly child care centers and home-based providers to share costs and deliver services in a more streamlined and efficient way. The reason this is often more germane to child care is because Head Start operations and school-based operations almost already to a T have this economy of scale built into their operation. So they're already advantaged by a number of sites and facilities under a single or sharing back office supports and hubs. That's why this strategy is particularly germane. Really, a lot of the others are ahead of us in this. But shared services is an approach, not an initiative. It's a framework that can be applied in many different ways in many different circumstances. Specifically, it focuses on supporting leadership in 2 key areas, business leadership and pedagogical leadership. And we have included a deep brief about the opportunity to think about the use of shared services in your Race to the Top application. as part of this webinar. And this is an area where if you're thinking about something to do in a cross-state collaborative manner, this could be an area of exploration to pull together with other states. And there are some great examples and ideas that you could almost take and drop right into an application if you were working with another state to do a collaboration in this area. We at the end of the webinar today, we'll give you an opportunity to chime in and let us know if you're interested, and we'll put states together that are interested in talking a little more, having a call to see if a collaboration in the shared service arena can work for you, and we'll get you in touch with experts to help facilitate that conversation and process. Okay? So I just wanted to call your attention specifically to that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our state participants. We have folks from Ohio, Rhode Island, and North Carolina. I'd like to begin with Alicia Leatherman, who's the Deputy Director of Child Care for the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. She assisted with the development and now implementation of the QRIS component of Ohio's successful Race to the Top ELC grant. Now to Rhode Island. Leanne Barrett is a Senior Policy Analyst for Rhode Island Kids Count. She wrote the QRIS component of Rhode Island's successful Race to the Top. You can see we got the real experts to come on this call with us today. And finally, Anna Carter from North Carolina. She's now President and CEO of Child Care Services Association, but the former Deputy Director of North Carolina Division of Child Development and Early Education. She assisted also with the development of the QRIS component of North Carolina's Race to the Top grant application. Welcome to all three of you. Make sure you all take yourselves off mute, and I'm just so delighted to have you on the call today to share with us your insights and experiences with the Race to the Top application. Let's start with Leanne. Leanne, can you set the stage a little for us about the context in Rhode Island when your state was developing a QRIS, when the application was released? Tell us about how you approached your plan and what were your priorities for Section B in particular.
Well, thanks, Debbie. And it's good to look back to those couple years ago. I remember when they released the RFP, there was an earthquake on the East Coast. I had a flashback to remembering that big day. So where we were, we worked on our application very closely with our Early Learning Council, which had only been in operation for, at that point, about a year effectively, but through the council we had already been moving along in terms of figuring out next steps and developing plans, and we relied on a lot of the work we had already finished through the council, recommendations or reports that we were able to incorporate into our application overall. So just a little background on our QRIS, which is called Bright Stars. It had been launched in 2009 and had been originally started, and we had a long community design process and engagement with national experts from 2005 through 2008. So we had a system already in place that had gotten some national recognition for our partnership with researchers. However, we had a limited number of programs participating because we had very little financial incentives for participation. Is that enough background, Debbie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So how did you approach your plan and priorities? Like, were you pretty much building on something that was already well vetted in the community, and it was about just having the financial resources to go further, or?
Well, we looked very carefully at the application, looked specifically at what they were looking for and what you got points for in particular. So we knew, yes, we had to. We already knew we wanted to increase participation, and we had been really hampered by having a terrible state budget situation and the economy over the years when we were really ramping up our QRIS. So this was our great opportunity to put money into helping programs participate and to move up. So that was a big priority, getting programs in, and looking also at aligning our standards across licensing, which was the foundation of our QRIS. you had to be have a license and be in compliance with the critical licensing standards. And our licensing system, the regs had last been updated in 1993. But so we knew we needed to do some work in licensing, and also our preschool approval standards were new in 2011. But we heard from providers who were concerned about the alignment issues across 3 systems that are coming out and monitoring. And that's been something our council had been working on and had already formed a committee on alignment. So we built that into our project as well, which wasn't necessarily called for specifically in Race to the Top, but we raised it as a concern we wanted to do locally that would help providers access the system and participate more effectively and be more efficient over time to make the system more sustainable.
That's great. Leanne, just remind me, is your state that the first tier is in the QRIS now, that level 1 is licensed?
We, in terms of making, so through Race to the Top, we're moving from voluntary to mandatory. And we proposed a phased-in approach. And right now we're just moving to have all CCAP programs come in. Okay. First we're doing improved financial incentives. Then we're doing mandatory CCAP. Then we're planning to do mandatory license programs and schools, public schools. So we're in the middle of it, and I think the phased-in approach is definitely something I would recommend if you get the grant and then you have to do it. so I think phasing in works, and people understand that you have to do what, propose something that's doable.
Okay, that's great. Okay, Anna, let's move to you in North Carolina. Can you set the stage a little for us about what was going on in North Carolina when the application came out, and how you approached the plan and priorities for this section?
Sure, Debbie, and thanks for having me be part of this call. And I can't tell you how great this would have been back in 2011 for those of us to have had this as a resource when we were first applying. So I know that the states that are applying this time around, are really appreciating what you all are doing, to assist them with this. But to talk about kind of North Carolina and where we were at that point is, we have had a QRIS since, well, a long time, but certainly our 5-star system since 1999 when all programs were moved into it. And so it is our licensing system. So I think that when other states talk about being able to use Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge as an opportunity to increase participation, that wasn't something that was really a North Carolina issue, because except for a few programs that are exempt because of a religious exemption, all of the rest of our programs are in our QRIS, and really about 85% or so are at our higher levels. So we have been very fortunate that this has been kind of the norm in our area. And I will say it was a little difficult to address how we were going to increase participation because our participation was so high. Do you say you're going to go from 90% to 91%? So that was kind of a challenge. But what we saw as an opportunity was to be able to apply related to things that would improve our existing system. We had a group that had been working since 2009 on what our next iteration of our QRIS would look like, so kind of our generation 3 for it. And so we already had kind of a framework for the areas where we knew there were weaknesses within our existing system, and that we knew we needed to, either because of new research or just new capacity, needed to incorporate. And so that is really what we use to kind of frame this section of the application, were the kinds of things that were identified as part of this 2-year process for making those changes to our QRIS.
Now I have a question. Are Head Starts and state pre-K licensed in your state?
Right. Yeah, we are very fortunate that all of those programs are already, the majority are already in our system. Our state pre-K, whether they're operated by the school system or out in the community, are required to be licensed. There's still a few, about 100 sites that are transitioning into that, but the majority already were licensed. Head Start is required to be licensed, and so it's we have that advantage that they were already in this system, and we're already participating in our QRIS.
That's great, and I understand from what you're saying that really you had a body of work going on, and in terms of thinking about strategically what was next for the growth and development of your system, and this application just gave you the opportunity to put it all together and get funding behind your ideas, right?
Absolutely. I mean, as this group had been meeting over the prior 2 years, so often the conversation was, well, when there's money, we can make this change, or when there's money to create this whatever, we can do that. And and this was just as, of course, in that time as now, recession was a really major issue, and it didn't look like there would be any money anytime soon. So it was just kind of this wonderful opportunity to actually be able to move forward with some of those things.
Well, that's great. Well, let's turn to Ohio. Alicia, tell us a little bit about Ohio. Set the stage for us. Where were you when the application came out in terms of creating a QRIS system in Ohio, and how did you approach the plan and priorities for this section?
Well, the first, just from a history standpoint, in our state, the Department of Education licenses school-based early childhood and school-age programs and administers preschool special ed and our state pre-K. The department that I work in, the Department of Job and Family Services, licenses and monitors family child care homes and all other, mostly community-based early childhood programs, and did not have any kind of differentiation in terms of payment and quality until we began planning for a quality rating and improvement system, which we began piloting in 2006. And it was really interesting when, Deb, you were going through the states that scored the highest on each section, and you were saying these are the things that highlighted. Ohio actually didn't have a number of those items. We still scored the highest, thank the Lord, but it was pretty interesting to reflect upon because we only have a 3-tiered system currently. We actually, in 19 days, are moving to our new 5-star system. But currently, the 3-star system and licensing is not level 1. But as Leanne mentioned, we do have licensing criteria that you must meet. Compliance threshold, you can't have, in our state we call them serious risk noncompliances, if you intend to become initially rated in our quality rating. So although it's not embedded in our quality rating, there is a direct connection to our licensing system.
So that sits right under the QRIS, right, for non-licensed programs, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, great.
We have a building block approach in our state. As we were coming into the grant, it was voluntary only to the programs, as I mentioned, that ODJFS licenses. We have a certification process for our small family child care homes, so they were not participating. Only our centers we license and our large family child care homes. And we have been pretty proud of our monitoring system to date. We did on-site annual reviews that included classroom observation, interviews, and then documentation. We have had fiscal supports and professional development supports from the beginning around, we've built it over time, but tiered reimbursement, annual quality payments based on your rating and the number of publicly funded children you serve, and supports like Teach and free professional development throughout our system. Where we really took advantage of and leveraged the opportunity with the Early Learning Challenge Grant was around bringing these two different systems under ODE and under ODJFS together. So we've been building a single definition of quality that crosses over preschool special ed, our state pre-K program, and just any other program that wants to identify themselves as a high-quality program in our state. We are trying to dissolve the two ways to determine that you're quality in our state by having everyone participate under the quality rating and improvement system. So all provider types being able to participate was a driver for us. Really looking at efficiencies in terms of how to leverage the staff that we have from our departments going into programs. So we are building an integrated staff and visit model where your licensing and your quality rating elements will be completed at the same time eventually in our state system. We also needed to incorporate a number of the new standards that Debbie mentioned as being focuses of the Early Learning Challenge Grant. So the health promotion and the family engagement. We did not have family engagement was embedded in a lot of our previous standards, and so we needed to pull those out and really strengthen and emphasize those. And then finally, we are a state that is using a significant amount of our money to build a single data system that will be used across the Department of Education and the Department of Job and Family Services that will include eventually all of our licensing compliance information and all of our quality compliance information. And that's across all provider types. And all parents will have access to all that information, where now they only have that information for some programs in our state. So those were a lot of our drivers.
Well, that's just great. Thank you so much. That database idea is huge. It's like you say goodbye to 5 or 6 staff when you start that kind of endeavor, right? It's so deep in terms of getting a big system like that going. That's fantastic. Anna, let's come back to you. What did you feel was the strongest part of your application in Section B? And how did you deal with any weaknesses you felt you had in Section B?
I think that one of the strengths within our application was that the kinds of things that we put in there that we would do were things that we felt could be sustained. And that's a big issue that I know that you all have talked about, is how do you create things that are going to truly impact quality but yet can be sustained after the dollars are gone. So, for example, one of the pieces that we had within our application was the creation of a new assessment tool, for example. North Carolina has used the ERS family of tools since we began, and I know there was a question that had been posed about using if states that use the class assessment tool, and North Carolina does not use that at this point. But what we knew was that there was a big benefit to creating a new tool that would do a better job of fully evaluating the quality at a different level than what you get within the environment rating scale tool. And we had heard that so significantly from our provider population of concerns about the tools that were used, and I think that may be true in other states as well. And so this provided an opportunity to do a project that was a multi-state project. And so I think that's a real strength to know that we're working not just in North Carolina, but we have a few other states that are joining with us on developing this tool, so that it is something that can benefit more than just one state. So I think that's something that's pretty unique. I think another strength was an opportunity to do some very targeted things. And Debbie, you mentioned this earlier about we created a transformation zone where we are going to be trying some very targeted things in there, and specifically from this section related to infant and toddler care. because we know that's a real weakness in our state and probably nationally, the level of quality that infants and toddlers receive. So this was a way to try some things in a smaller area to see if it would work. And if that works, then we have an opportunity to perhaps spread that to a larger area. So I think that those were both strengths that we had within our application. I think a weakness or an area of challenge is that quite a bit of what was in our application was based on the hope that we would then actually be able to make changes actually within our QRIS or our licensing rules. And North Carolina is in a very different environment right now than we were 2 or 3 years ago. And so I think we are in a real, there's a real kind of dilemma about if or how we're going to be able to make actual changes within what is required within our QRIS as opposed to what we make available for people to participate in, whether it's new CEUs that have been created or other activities. But to make it required, again, things are very different now than they were 2 years ago. And so I think that's a challenge when you're doing an application to really not know what your environment is going to be like in the future and how that may impact on some of the things that you put into your application.
That is so interesting, and really, it's about the crystal ball there, right?
Exactly.
Can you see down the road as to what are the factors, either economic or political or financial, that are going to impact your ability to execute the plan in the end? Very interesting. Leanne, what would you say about this?
Well, I think strengths, from what I've read in the review comments and other places, is the thoughtful approach. We had a very small QRIS with 100 programs, which was about 15% of our licensed programs in the states when we applied. So we had limited experience implementing, but we'd done a lot of thoughtful work in designing it, including really working on a public-private partnership from the beginning with partnerships from United Way and our community foundations on board, and very involved with all of the key early childhood providers in the system. We engaged a lot of national experts and held focus groups, and we worked very closely with researchers at FPG and North Carolina to test out our original draft. So we basically did a version of a validation study before we launched our QRIS, so we had the data to present in bar charts to sort of show what we found through that research project, the adjustments we had made to improve the validity of our system, so that when we rolled it out, we knew that it was differentiating quality across. So I've heard that that was a strength of our application, along with the existing measurement practices we had, which we developed in partnership with FPG experts to make sure we were using valid and reliable tools. We were minimizing any self-reported data. We were verifying everything that we could and maintaining reliability. So we had a lot of that stuff ready to plug into, I think that's section B3. We had done work with NARA already, which is a licensing professional organization across our QRIS and our licensing body to improve alignment and to do this, identify the significant noncompliance. So we built a lot of foundation that made what we thought our system was high quality and ready to go to scale. And then weaknesses, limited participation was our main weakness. And I think that we just addressed it by saying we'd had limited resources. But we had already through the council identified a goal of and started a little bit of work with Ann Mitchell on the cost modeling, which we actually put on hold while we were writing this application because we didn't have time to do it. And then we came back to it after we got the grant. And originally the council, we were just going to hire Ann and she was going to give us the cost modeling components, but we weren't going to have any new money. But we'd at least know how much it would cost to implement a program at each level. But through Race to the Top, we were able to finish that and actually build that in and start paying programs more money based on the quality rating they received. So that was a huge advantage for us, although I wished our work with Ann had been already done so we could have just plugged it in there. But it wasn't done, but we said we were starting it and we wanted to continue that. And the other sort of weakness that I know we had talked on and on about was there's these extra points that you can get in this. There's a section at the end around including all programs in your QRIS is one, and the other one is licensing all family child care homes that serve 2 or more unrelated children. So the first one we were successful. We had tons and tons of conversations about including all programs. And the hardest one was public schools, because we at this point didn't have any public schools in there, and we hadn't designed it really to include public schools. Public schools aren't licensed. So through the council and all of our conversations when we were developing it, we did get to the point where we said public schools will be in it, and we got in some of our letters of support some key people to indicate they were supportive of this idea. And then the other one, though, was about licensing even very small family child care providers. We start licensing at 4 and up, 4 children and up. So we talked a lot about that, and we ended up deciding we weren't going to make that change because licensing in particular had old regulations that they needed to update. And the other issue was family child care homes were only getting visited once every other year, when the national recommendations are you need to visit them at least once a year. And we knew from our research with North Carolina actually that 67% of our family child care homes that were licensed were low quality. So we wanted to build up licensing. So we actually proposed using Race to the Top funding to beef up licensing practices and to increase the number of inspections for family child care homes, and to not move to include more in the system until we were doing a better job with the current programs.
So you kind of tackled that, what could be seen as a deficit, not going to just 2 children. You tackled that by saying we're going to shore up the family child care home and really focus in on improving quality in that venue. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. All right, Alicia, what did you feel was the strongest part of your application in Section B?
We decided to focus on publicly funded children in our application, which obviously matched the high needs children with high needs. So we proposed that instead of our quality rating and improvement system being voluntary for all, that we would require publicly funded providers participating in publicly funded programs such as preschool special ed, our state pre-K program, and our child care, publicly funded child care program, that they would be required to participate. And in fact, 6 months after we were awarded the challenge grant, we passed legislation that requires a gradual mandate that ends in 2020 with anyone receiving publicly funded child care dollars needing to be rated. And that's about 7,500 providers in our state. And we currently are at about, when we wrote the grant, we were at 1,078 providers. So we expect significant increases between now and the year 2020, and a lot during these years. So that was a big push for us. The second was all settings. Our state education department had a separate process called the impact to monitor the quality of the state pre-K and preschool special ed sites, and choosing that process would now happen within the quality rating and improvement system and go across to publicly funded child care was, we think, a huge part of our application and success. And then the fact that we had 3 additions of a validation study, from pilot to the latest on a small group of children in our quality rating improvement system, a comparison group looking at child outcomes, that we think the fact that we had data and that we had been thinking about evaluation and validation was a strong component of our proposal.
Wow. I do have a question just to ask. So did you fund, this was a question up front from one of the participants. So did you fund evaluation in your Race to the Top grant, additional evaluation?
Yes, we do have additional validation for our, did I mention in 19 days we're going to a new 5-star system? That system will have a validation. We will validate the new standards and as part of the rollout of the new system. So yes,
okay.
Using Early Learning Challenge funds.
Rhode Island and North Carolina, did you all fund evaluation or a validation study in this?
Yeah. We did in North Carolina.
Okay.
Yep, and we did too. And that was we said we'd done a little bit already, but we hadn't gone to the child outcomes yet, so we have money built in there for that.
Okay. All right. Now on to Alicia. What did you feel was a weakness in your state that you had to address in this section? I think you covered that already.
Yeah, I mean just the different, how we defined quality.
Okay.
That was different based on funding and based on your licensing entity. That was a huge system gap that we were trying to fill with our proposal, and how to really think through quality, the definition of quality regardless of payer or regulator shouldn't matter to the families in our state. So that was a weakness in our system that we tried to fill that gap with what we proposed in the challenge grant.
Well, Alicia, let's just keep going. What would you share as any lessons learned? Any final lessons learned or thoughts that you want to put out on the table for these future applicants to consider?
I think just because we're in the middle of building our IT system to support this work, and the transition from our 3-star system to our 5-star system, a couple of things. One is, Debbie already said it, Deb said it. The staff that get assigned to work on the system from the program side, you really have to think about staffing and resources. If building a new IT system is part of your work, you cannot count on those programmatic staff being available to do all the policy and implementation design and help design the system. So really think critically about the amount of staff that you have if you have major projects. We did not do that, and we have staff that are working an incredible amount of time and that I worry about all the time. The other thing is when you're setting your goals, if you're transitioning and creating new standards, one of the things that I don't think we fully accounted for is as soon as you announce that your plans in your challenge grant that are getting funded are to change your quality rating and improvement system, you may have people back off of wanting to be rated in the existing system. So when you're setting your goals, I would just take that into consideration in that first or second year as you're building the new system, because people, we have found as we've gotten closer to the transition, we actually had a flood of programs want to come into the existing system because we're automatically transitioning them to a new level in our 5-star system. But there's also data conversion downtime. There's time where you won't be doing visits because you need to kind of wrap up the old system to kick off the new. So in those ambitious yet achievable targets, just take some of those implementation ups and downs and peaks into consideration so that you're not overestimating what you can get accomplished.
Great, thank you. Leanne, what's your
Well, I guess I would echo what Alicia just said, because and I think it's where we're coming from as states that are, almost 2 years into this implementation, is that those targets that you set in Section B are really important, and you're sort of in the dark. At least I was when we were developing them, and especially like how are you going to move people up the levels over time. So a lot of that's a good best guess. And one of the things that we did say as we move from voluntary to mandatory, we actually showed over time that we're going to see a reduction in ratings, because many of the programs who came in under a voluntary system are early adopters and are higher quality anyway. I think that they found that in other states as well. So we actually showed that percentage-wise that we would have more lower quality programs out of the total participating in years 2, 3, and 4, and trying to regain the percentage-wise at the end of year 5. And it's just a challenge to figure out how to do those estimates, but then they hold you to them later on. So I just do your best, I guess, on that one. I guess another one that I remember reading the comments on was I think it's really important to just say again and again, because reviewers come from all different walks of life, to specify all the different parts of the system that will be in the QRIS or that are already in the QRIS, and the work that you've done with them to engage them beyond centers. So family child care, for example, was something I remember reviewers saying that we hadn't tested it with family child care, and I read that and I thought, but we did. I guess I didn't write that. So people are looking to make sure you're engaging family child care, so if you are, you should write about it. And Head Start too. And we had Head Start involved from the very beginning, and we had a quarter of our Head Starts already in Bright Stars, and we had strong support letters from Head Start and family child care. So I was just thought that was a key thing. And when you look at, they recruit reviewers from all different walks of life, and they may have different perspectives. So make sure you mention all the different kinds of settings, and infants and toddlers, family child care, all of that. And the last one is
go ahead. You have a great point there about errors of omission, though, because you're so in the thick of it. You think, of course, everybody knows that we did that, or what. It's hard to get a handle on what have you missed? And so to that end, sometimes states were getting someone not associated with their state to read it, or not as deep into the QRIS, like a strong EI person or a Head Start person or somebody else within the state or from outside the state for that exact reason, because sometimes it's just really an error of omission and you actually had done something.
Yeah,
so
I think you're right. And we were also really concerned back then about page length, and I don't know if people are still anymore, but it seems like I would err on go over your page length, but don't leave anything out that you think that someone might care about later on.
And what was your third one?
My last one is very simple, which is I put all of these bar charts and things in there that were in color. And then at the end, when whoever converts it into the files that get sent or uploaded, they turn everything to black and white. And some of the reviewers couldn't read, it didn't come across very well. The bar charts in some of the areas disappeared. So I just thought that was so annoying that I had spent all of this time on these bar charts and pie charts, and then they got ruined. So I would just figure out how to design them in black and white from the very beginning, so you know what they're going to look like in the final.
That's a great tip. Thank you. And Anna, any final words about lessons learned or what you might have done differently?
Yeah, I think it's just so interesting, because what I had written down yesterday was how, the concept of ambitious yet achievable, and realizing that everything is going to take longer than you expect it to take, and it's going to take more staff than you would expect. I mean, just exactly what Alicia and Leanne were saying, that you may be deciding or have in there that you're going to contract out to do some sort of activity, but you still have to account for your own staff's time that to be involved with that contractor, that oversight of it. That If you think it's going to take 2 months to get something up and running, then it's kind of like when you remodel your house, just double the amount of time and potentially double the amount of money, not that necessarily that's available. The other thing is that I think you just need to be really aware when you're looking at that timeline of, are you putting out too much for the whoever the audience is? For example, we had a number of things within our application that we're creating continuing ed courses around things like curriculum or revised early learning standards, or about the use of the class tool or cultural competence. And they're all going to be excellent courses. But yet when a provider is getting yet another information about yet another course, it's the next month and it's another one that's coming out, or you're trying to ensure that you have those who provide the training be available, and you're now needing to do another train the trainer, and they're getting each month to sign up to do another train the trainer, it gets very overwhelming. So I think it's making sure you look at that application truly as a whole, and not just at the timeline for that one activity, but how does it intersect with other activities, and make sure you're not doing yourself in, the community in, your trainers in, the providers in, by making it be too overwhelming in that individual quarter, that month, that year.
That is a terrific piece of advice, to really look at the whole and see, is this actually doable in our context? Just because you have that money in front of you and all these great ideas and vision, and it is easy to overreach in an application like this. And you're right, at the same time you have that ambitious yet achievable out there staring you in the face, and so how do you blend all that together in something that you can really execute in the end? That's just great advice from you folks, and I want to thank you, the three of you, so much for the time and effort that you shared with us here today. Really appreciate your thoughts. Okay, we'll move ahead and conclude the presentation. We have a few wrap-up points about the points available. I think that probably all of you have studied this to the nth degree. The points that are available in each of the sections and subsections. And let's move ahead to a little bit of a discussion about the targets and goal in the light of your plans. This is difficult because you are held to the targets and the goals, and Section B has more of the performance measure benchmarks, I think, than almost any other section. So they really do come back and look at this and analyze what you said you were going to do and what you're doing. Promoting the participation of all the programs, all publicly funded early and development programs. So you're going to want to define for newly implemented QRISs what's reasonable goal for participation in the first, second, and third. I shared in our handouts for today Excel spreadsheet that shows the targets that the Race to the Top states developed, whether they were in terms of participation and movement in the first year to the final year, about where the percentages of programs that they expected to be at different levels. I found this very interesting exercise to just go through, and have provided it just for your information. You can see the targets that states set and how the chart flows from the beginning to the end in terms of how many providers are at each level. And there's, on the top you'll see there are the 9 first round award winners, and in the bottom you'll see the next 5 that were picked up in round 2 and what the targets look like there. I also showed participation targets for the voluntary states. Of course, those that have the QRIS and licensing are going to have 100% participation. So we didn't do an analysis of those. And you can see how the charting looks from the first to the last year for all the 14 winners and Race to the Top. Thought you might, as you're trying to wrestle with this target thing. Another thing that impacts your targets, don't forget, is the phase-in of the programs you're bringing into the QRIS. So you might see a bump in one of the state's targets. Oh, that's the year that pre-K came in or Head Start came in. So there's a lot to really consider in terms of how you're adding in and what that means to the targets you're putting out on the table. I think that there have been questions in the targets about how do you get, Head Start, Special Education Part B, school-based pre-K, and your strategies and conversations that you've had with folks from those groups, and how big a piece of work you think it's going to be is going to help you figure out what year do you bring them in, or how do you do it, and are you going to involve smaller providers, and how might that affect your targets, and what would that look like? I think is going to be a big consideration for everyone. I just wanted to call your attention again to these charts that you all know are there with the studying that you've done already, but the performance measures and those charts for each section, increasing the number and percentage of programs, increasing the number and percent in the top tiers, and increasing the number and percent of children with high need score enrolled. Sometimes bringing Head Start in really help the child in high need numbers grow. So, and this is data that's not always easily available within the state. How many children and high needs children are in a center or in a Head Start facility or in a state pre-K program? So actually getting the child number data, it sounds easier than it can sometimes be on the ground for us in the trenches. The next part, well, this talks about that spreadsheet that I shared with you about the participation and comparison of the quality levels and what those that have gone before you anticipated in terms of that over the life of their grants. A few additional points to remember. And this was written in the guidance that the feds gave out about the narrative and how to write that and how you're addressing the criteria and all sections and elements of the criteria. They made a big deal this time about the evidence. If you have evidence to include additional information helpful to the reviewers, because they said it so much made me feel like this might have been a weakness, the supporting evidence or the reference to the supporting evidence in your narrative, so that a reviewer would turn to it in that section and actually look at it. And then the performance measures we just had a quick look at. Finally, and this is tiny print on this slide, but I do think it's key for you to go back to each element of the high quality plan and make sure that you're clear and that you address each of these elements. I would assume for the reviewers it's kind of a checkbox where they're going, did they note the goal? Do they have key activities? Do they have a realistic timeline? I am sure that that is part of the scoring rubric, and they do show that in the documents that they've posted online. So just make sure that you cover all your bases in this section. Now briefly to a few wrap-up points. One person had a question about rating programs on an annual basis and how states are doing that. Are they full or partial ratings? I think that people are doing a variety of ways on this, and the big thing would be to have a coherent point of view about how you're doing your monitoring and rating, and how you're assessing if you're getting the stick with your rating. Like if it's a 2-year cycle, how are people sending updated annual reports? Are you randomized checking to see if the rating is holding in between times? Those kind of things. I think that someone else asked a question about the role for Head Start and early Head Start. I think it's felt you need to figure out a way to include them, especially center-based early Head Start. I don't think that there was as much a priority on including home-based programs, but certainly home-based programs in terms of knitting them into your system are addressed in your workforce standards, in your early learning standards, and then they bring a set of performance standards to the table as well. So they should be a deep part of your system. Whether you're actually tiering and applying a rating to them has been a great conversation across the states lately, and in terms of home visiting for early intervention. Certainly how they're connected to your system, how you're referring and using those elements is very important. We did have, I hope everybody's reading and can see in the chat box about Alicia posting a great point for all of us to consider about make sure someone documents how you pulled your original numbers out of the data system on the performance measures. So you need that logic to pull and create your annual performance report for the feds. Just a terrific point. I can see it, especially if you have turnover in the departments. You're sitting there going, how did we get that number 2 years ago or a year ago? Just a terrific point. And we wanted to talk for a moment about the class. I think that there are a number of states that are moving to also or supplementing at the higher levels, thinking the ERS is more environmental monitoring system, and then at the higher level certainly they want to get to the deeper staff-child interaction. I think it's a waste of time to do these as only rating and monitoring tools, and would hope that everyone would figure out how those roll out into a continuous quality improvement plan for the facility, and the data and the insight that's gained from using those tools, it really just has to be key to improving the programs and turned around to be useful in the CQI approach. I do have more refined numbers, and we can certainly give you the contact for the class and Teachstone, and they can give you, they have stats on exactly how many states are using the class and at what levels of the system, what levels of the quality continuum that tool comes to bear. Do you have other questions? This is a great opportunity. We posted a tool for planning that Ann Mitchell developed, and we updated of how to think about the standards and the tool and the, all the components of a standard QRIS and how you're addressing them within your program. Are there any? Raise your hand if you have a question and take yourself off mute, or type another question in if you have something. We're getting to the end of the presentation. I just want to make sure we don't have any thoughts or ideas that aren't covered here. Like I said in the beginning, we do have the addresses for all the websites post on our and state contact spreadsheet. Feel free to email me with specific questions or needs that you might have. And we do have the ELC Collaborative website up, and there's a lot of terrific resources there. Well, seeing no more questions, Susan, I'd like to turn the program back over to you to help wrap us up.
Thanks. That was great. I think it is so wonderful to hear from the states that applied and won in the earlier rounds. It's so helpful as we think about this new round. I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. If you haven't had enough webinars yet this week, we have another one tomorrow at the very same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, on PK3 and the Early Learning Challenge, which I think will also be great. And for any of your colleagues that haven't been able to either make this one or other ones, they do all get posted so you can listen to them at any time or just search through the PowerPoint and the resources. I also want to say that the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, doesn't have a ton of money, but we do have some private funds to support your application preparation. And we've talked to many of the states that are applying. There are a few who we think might be applying who we have not heard from. So if you are looking for some support that we haven't yet talked with you about, feel free to contact Debbie or Jerry or me or whoever you're in most touch with at the BUILD Initiative, and we will try to help you. Some of the kinds of ways that we've helped states are we've looked at round one applications and given advice about how we thought it could be strengthened. It's a little late to do that now, although we could if you feel like that's the most useful thing. We've lined up reviewers both for particular sections, like if you really want your first draft of Section B to be read by a QRIS expert, we can do that. Or we can round up more general reviewers, people who we think are kind of like the federal reviewers who will ultimately be scoring your application. So people who will be reading it for the thread of the story and the consistency of the parts and the overall effectiveness of your argument, et cetera. There are also times when states ask for very specific tailored technical assistance that might be more like a little research piece, like what states have done X, what are the different models of doing Y that we can do. We particularly can put a little money to that if it's the kind of thing that will end up being information that would be useful to the whole field. Something that others will want to know at some point so that we can make it public. And then this series of webinars goes on, not just tomorrow, but there'll be others in the coming weeks. And I guess last, and sort of related to the information that Debbie mentioned about the shared services brief and information about how you might include that in your applications, we're also interested in just seeing if there are states who are interested in trying to form a cross-state collaboration on some topic. In round one, obviously, Maryland and Ohio had a collaboration on their kindergarten entry assessment, and then just today they were awarded a grant, as was North Carolina and Texas, to work further on their kindergarten entry assessment. But if you're thinking about something like even a community of practice across states related to a particular topic, or joint work in some area that you think could be done well cross-state, please contact us and we can help match you with other states that have the same interests. We think it's really an opportunity to not have 50 states do their own separate part, but to do something together and to use each other's resources and brain power. So that's really all I had to share, but I really thank you, Debbie, and all of the presenters. I thought it was really useful, and good luck to all of you state leaders who are applying this time. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you. Please stand by.